I was too busy fixing everyone else's mistakes to listen to my own husband. Those words hit the banquet hall with perfect clarity, amplified through the sound system for 200 guests to hear. My sister Chelsea stood center stage in her custom silk wedding gown, bathed in warm spotlight, a microphone in one hand and my private divorce letter in the other. The paper crackled against the microphone every time she shifted her grip, and that small sharp sound cut through a room that had gone completely, unnaturally silent. The scent of white lilies from the towering centerpieces, sweet and heavy just minutes earlier, suddenly felt suffocating, far too much for a room where nobody was breathing. Under the table, the stiff corner of a thick envelope pressed hard into my palm. I let it dig into my skin. The pain kept me grounded. I was 38 years old, and until recently I had been the operations director of our family business, the woman who spent her entire career orchestrating flawless events for high society clients, quietly fixing disasters before anyone in the room ever noticed them. And now I was sitting at my own younger sister's wedding reception, watching her turn the most humiliating collapse of my life into evening entertainment. Chelsea read another line, this one about my emotional distance, and every single word she spoke was true. I knew it was true because I had written those exact sentences myself, to my own husband, during our final mediation session. That was precisely why I couldn't stand up and scream that the letter was fake. It wasn't fake. It was real, and it was mine, and she was using it like a knife. Our mother, Barbara, stared down at her dessert plate, lips pressed into a thin flat line. Beside her, our father sat rigid inside his tuxedo, visibly terrified of a public scandal but completely unwilling to stand up and stop his favorite daughter. A few guests at the next table had already raised their phones, screens glowing in the dim light, recording the spectacle for whoever wanted to watch it later. The bride paused to turn a page, and the stage lighting caught the bottom edge of the paper for just a second. Chelsea had folded the corner back, pressing her thumb firmly over the footer, hiding something. But as she adjusted her grip to hold the microphone closer to her mouth, I caught it. Printed numbers at the bottom of the sheet. Page 4 of 5. She wasn't reading from the original letter. She had brought a printed copy, and she had deliberately, carefully removed the final page. The realization hit me with total clarity, washing away the last of my initial shock. This wasn't a drunken, improvised outburst. This was calculated. Chelsea knew I had the fifth page, and she knew exactly what was written on it, so she had decided to strike first, painting me as a crazy, jealous, bitter sister before I ever had the chance to say a single word to her groom. I pushed my chair back and stood. The heavy wooden legs scraped loudly against the ballroom floor, the sound cutting through the silence like a gunshot. I didn't run toward the stage. I didn't lunge for the microphone. I simply stood my ground and spoke, loud enough for the front tables to hear every word clearly. Why didn't you read the final page, Chelsea? Her practiced, radiant smile froze instantly. The bride lowered the microphone a fraction of an inch, her eyes darting toward our parents for a split second before snapping back to lock onto mine. Because it changes nothing, Megan, she snapped. My hands had gone completely cold, but my voice stayed steady. I knew exactly what was written on that missing page. And I knew exactly why my sister was terrified of it. I reached into my purse, pulled out the original 5-page letter, and walked straight past the head table toward the groom. Aaron watched me approach, his face a mixture of confusion and deep discomfort inside his tailored suit. He had spent the last hour celebrating, completely unaware of the trap his bride had built underneath his own wedding. Read the last paragraph, I told him, holding out the heavy document. He looked at his bride, then down at the paper in his hands. I leaned in and pointed to my own signature at the bottom of page 5, then pointed to a formal summary my attorney, Dana, had stapled beneath it. The summary detailed a comprehensive forensic technology review, one that linked the fake affair accounts that had destroyed my marriage to a hired digital freelancer. It proved that freelancer had been hired directly by Chelsea. And most damning of all, it showed the initial deposit had been paid using a device registered to Aaron Blake, using a corporate credit card ending in 4 very specific digits. Aaron read the lines slowly. He blinked, then read them a second time, and I watched the exact moment reality set in behind his eyes. He recognized the name of his own laptop. He recognized the last 4 numbers of his corporate credit card. The groom turned, slowly, deliberately, to face his bride, and the confusion on his face was already hardening into something sharper, something dangerous. "Is this true?" Aaron asked, his voice low but carrying easily across the silent dance floor. Chelsea didn't answer him directly. Instead, she pointed a manicured finger at me, her face flushing a deep, furious red. "She's lying," Chelsea said, her voice climbing into something frantic. "You know she's lying. You knew about the test campaign from the very beginning, Aaron. You gave me permission." Our father finally stood, raising both hands, begging everyone to please stay calm and remember where they were. The room erupted into a wave of quiet, frantic murmurs, and Chelsea tried to use the noise to her advantage, stepping closer to Aaron, invading his space. "She's just a bitter, jealous woman trying to ruin my perfect day because her own husband left her," Chelsea said, grabbing his arm, her knuckles turning white against the dark fabric of his jacket. "Tell her you knew," Chelsea demanded. Aaron stared down at her hand, gripping his sleeve for a long, heavy second. Then he pulled his arm free and took a deliberate step back, putting real physical distance between himself and his bride. "I don't even know what you're talking about," he said. His words hung in the air of that reception hall, and I stood there in the silence, listening to the man she was about to marry deny any knowledge of her plans in front of 200 witnesses. And for a moment, standing in the wreckage of that ballroom, my mind pulled back, all the way back, to a time when people used to call my sister and me the perfect team. 20 months before that wedding fell apart, Foster House Events ran on a simple division of labor. Our parents had built the company decades earlier, but Chelsea and I were the ones who actually ran it. She designed the experiences, chose the historical venues, selected the custom color palettes, and charmed high-end clients into spending double their original budgets without ever feeling pressured. I handled everything else. I held the keys, managed the accounts, and possessed the final authority on every vendor contract that crossed our desks. On paper, it worked beautifully. In reality, the balance of power always leaned in my direction. Chelsea created the light. I controlled the electricity. In February of the previous year, we all gathered in the main conference room. Chelsea stood at the head of the long mahogany table, projecting a slide deck that looked like it belonged in a glossy bridal magazine. She was pitching a massive corporate expansion, proposing we open 3 new branches in 3 different cities, all within a 12-month window. Our mother beamed from her seat, nodding along to an inspiring speech about capturing the luxury destination market. The presentation was gorgeous, and everyone in the room seemed completely captivated. But as I looked down at the printed financial packets she had distributed, a quiet alarm went off in the back of my mind. The numbers didn't add up. The projected revenue for the first quarter was astronomically high, while the estimated labor costs for 3 brand new teams were suspiciously, almost impossibly low. There was also a massive line item labeled simply as a vendor securing commission, with absolutely no specific payment information attached to it. Instead of pulling my sister aside to ask about it privately over coffee, I opened my laptop right there at the table and logged into the company network. I pulled up the original spreadsheet behind the proposal, which contained a detailed version history, and scanning through the edits revealed exactly what I feared. It was worse than a simple calculation error. Someone had manually increased the revenue projections and drastically slashed the labor estimates, just 2 days after our accounting department had already signed off on the initial draft. That was my fatal mistake. I was absolutely right about the corrupted data, but I used my correctness like a blunt instrument instead of a scalpel. The debt risk felt too high to wait for a quiet moment, so I didn't wait. I brought it up immediately, pointing out the discrepancies right there in front of our parents, the independent board chairman, and our chief financial officer. The air in the room turned heavy instantly. Chelsea stopped advancing her slides. Her shoulders stiffened beneath her tailored blazer as she locked eyes with me. "You never trust my vision, Megan," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. I should have stopped right there, or at least suggested we review the math together after lunch, privately, like sisters. Instead, I delivered the final blow. "I trust your talent, Chelsea," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I don't trust your judgment with this much debt on the line." Those words landed on the glass table like dropped stones. Our independent chairman cleared his throat and quietly closed his folder, while the chief financial officer suddenly found his own shoes fascinating. My sister kept her flawless professional smile locked in place, but I watched her manicured nails dig so deeply into her leather portfolio that her knuckles turned completely white. The meeting ended quickly after that, and the board tabled the expansion plan indefinitely. 30 minutes later, my father called me into his private office. He closed the heavy oak door, poured himself a glass of water, and told me he planned to name me the new chief executive officer by the following year. I didn't run out to celebrate or brag about the promotion. Honestly, the thought of what this meant for my sister never even crossed my mind, let alone the idea of offering her a clear path to leadership standing beside me. Later that evening I mentioned the obvious tension to our mother. Barbara just waved a hand, dismissing the concern entirely. She insisted the younger girl would get over it, adding, almost proudly, that I had always been the stronger one anyway, the daughter who could handle the hard decisions. 2 nights later, we had our regular family dinner at my parents' house. Chelsea arrived carrying a bottle of expensive wine and, I would later understand, a perfectly rehearsed speech. Standing in the kitchen while the oven preheated, she poured me a glass and apologized. She told me I had saved the company from a rash, emotional decision, and thanked me for being the logical anchor of the family. I accepted the apology completely. I believed her, because her words fit so neatly into the story I wanted to believe, a convenient world where logic always resolved emotional conflict cleanly and permanently. We finished dinner, and the evening felt like a healthy reset for our working relationship. But while I was in the kitchen helping our mother clear the dessert plates, Chelsea slipped down the hallway into my home office. I wouldn't learn the truth until much later. In those quiet 10 minutes, she downloaded a complete copy of our shared corporate calendar and photographed my private client roster, a list of valuable contacts only I managed directly. My sister was done fighting for approval in boardrooms. She had found a completely different battlefield. 3 weeks later, my husband received the first message from a woman using my name. The first message arrived on a Tuesday evening. Colin was sitting on the living room sofa scrolling through his phone when a notification lit up the screen. An unknown number had sent him a photograph. It showed me standing next to Ian Davenport outside a prominent downtown restaurant. Ian was a wealthy corporate client, a married man with 3 children, and an incredibly important account for our business. The photo itself was entirely real, taken after a large vendor dinner, but the frame had been tightly cropped to remove the 6 other people standing on the sidewalk with us. Without that context, it looked like an intimate, late-night farewell between 2 people who shouldn't have been standing that close together. Along with the cropped photograph came a series of screenshots displaying text messages from a social media account registered under my name. The messages used very specific phrases, the exact corporate vocabulary and polite greetings I typically used in my daily emails. Whoever built the lie didn't stop with a single image. A second text delivered a scanned hotel receipt from a venue scouting trip I had taken 2 months earlier. My shared corporate calendar, the same one my sister had quietly downloaded, proved Ian happened to be in that exact same city during those exact same dates. The fabricated account then sent several romantic messages to the unknown number, all routed through a prepaid phone service, making the entire digital trail look credible and deeply, deliberately hidden. The digital breadcrumbs formed a perfect, devastating line straight to me. My husband walked into the kitchen and placed his phone face up on the granite island. He asked me one question, his voice tight and completely stripped of its usual warmth. He wanted to know if I was sleeping with my client. Looking down at the bright screen, I saw a fabricated message about a hotel room key, and a sudden, intense heat rushed up the back of my neck. I had spent my entire professional life managing risk, verifying contracts, and demanding absolute proof before making any accusation. And now the man I had married 8 years earlier was willing to throw our entire life away over a handful of anonymous screenshots. If you already believe this, nothing I say will be enough, I told him. I didn't pick up the device to check the phone number. I didn't ask him to forward me the original files so I could inspect the hidden metadata myself. Pride anchored my feet to that kitchen floor, and anger made my vision blur at the edges. Instead of methodically dismantling the accusation the way I would have handled any other crisis in my career, I turned my back, walked out of the kitchen, and climbed the stairs to the guest bedroom. Colin didn't follow me. The silence in the house that night was heavy, but it wasn't unfamiliar. Our foundation had been cracking for a long time before that. Over the previous 2 years, my husband had frequently complained that I treated our marriage like an operational hazard. I routinely rearranged his schedule to fit my client meetings, answered questions on his behalf at dinner parties, and brought my aggressive management mindset straight into our dining room. Just 6 months earlier, I had completely missed a scheduled couples therapy appointment because a floral vendor delivered the wrong centerpieces to a charity gala. None of those failures proved infidelity, but they had quietly built a massive emotional distance between us. I had built a wall, brick by brick, without ever meaning to. And the fabricated messages simply gave Colin a convenient, ready-made explanation for why that wall existed. He was ready to believe I lived a secret life, because he already felt completely locked out of my real one. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang. Chelsea stood on the porch holding 2 cups of coffee, wearing a deeply concerned expression. She stepped inside and immediately pulled me into a tight embrace. My sister smelled like vanilla and expensive dry cleaning, and she spoke in soft, soothing tones, offering to mediate the escalating disaster. Sitting at the kitchen table, she gently asked me to explain exactly what Colin had seen, needing to know the precise details of the evidence, pretending she just wanted to understand the full scope of the misunderstanding. I poured out every single detail, completely unaware that I was handing the architect of my destruction a real-time status report on her own demolition project. Later that evening, Chelsea sat with Colin out on the back patio, playing the sympathetic family member perfectly. When Colin mentioned my cold, dismissive reaction in the kitchen, Chelsea nodded slowly and told him I had always been distant and detached whenever someone caught me making a mistake. The true brilliance of the trap became apparent the following morning. Colin walked into the hallway, his face pale and exhausted, and handed me his phone again. A new message had arrived overnight from the anonymous number. I read the text and my stomach dropped completely. The message contained a very specific phrase, something about finding a quiet harbor in a loud storm. It wasn't a generic romantic line. I had written those exact words myself, in a private draft of vows I was preparing for our upcoming anniversary. That document existed exclusively on our home computer, and I had only ever emailed it to one single person for feedback. A cold, sick realization washed over me. Whoever was constructing this nightmare had intimate, immediate access to my private files. But instead of seeing the obvious culprit sitting right next to me at family dinners, my mind jumped to the wrong conclusion entirely. I suspected Colin was setting an elaborate trap to test my honesty, or that maybe Ian Davenport was hiding a real affair of his own and using my name as a convenient shield. The lie was devastatingly effective precisely because it wove real data points into a fabricated conclusion, continuously updated by the very person pretending to comfort us both. Colin didn't wait for me to explain the vow draft. He pulled his phone back out of my hand and reached into his shirt pocket, retrieving a folded piece of paper. He handed the printed document to me without saying a word. It was a forwarded email from Ian Davenport, addressed directly to the managing board of Foster House Events, formally requesting that the company remove me from his account immediately. The forwarded email glowed on my laptop screen, black text glaring against the bright white background. My hands gripped the edge of the kitchen island so tightly my knuckles began to ache. Ian hadn't explicitly confirmed an affair in his message, but his formal complaint stated that my personal scandal was creating a massive distraction ahead of his upcoming corporate retreat. His wife had seen the fabricated text messages, and as a result he absolutely refused to speak with me directly. A cold knot formed in my stomach. 2 hours later, a pair of other major clients placed their annual contracts on indefinite hold. The damage was spreading faster than a spilled glass of red wine across a white tablecloth, and I had absolutely no way to stop it. My parents summoned me to the main corporate office the very next morning. Sitting across from Thomas and Barbara felt like facing a hostile board of directors rather than the people who had raised me. The room smelled of polished mahogany and stale coffee. They didn't suggest hiring an independent forensic investigator. They didn't ask to review the messages themselves. My father simply tapped his gold pen against a leather folio and cleared his throat before asking me to take a temporary leave of absence, to protect the brand, he said. My sister sat quietly at the end of the long table, wearing a perfectly sympathetic expression, and leaned forward, placing a comforting hand on her notebook, offering to manage my accounts until everything cleared up. Looking at the three of them, a bitter realization settled heavily in my chest. The family cared entirely about client perception, and the actual truth of the evidence mattered far less than maintaining our spotless public image. I left the building and drove straight downtown, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, anger completely overriding my usual disciplined approach to crisis management. Instead of consulting an attorney or taking a single moment to breathe, I marched into Ian Davenport's corporate lobby and demanded 10 minutes of his time. When he finally stepped out of the brass elevators, he looked genuinely terrified. I cornered him near the security desk, my voice echoing off the marble walls, sharp and unyielding, demanding to know exactly who had sent those screenshots to his wife. Ian practically ran back to the safety of his office. Less than 10 minutes later, he called Foster House Events and asked to speak with his new account manager. He told Chelsea I had just ambushed him and threatened his career. My sister realized immediately that I was actively hunting for the source of the data. That same afternoon, the prepaid phone number that had been texting my husband abruptly stopped operating. The fabricated messaging profile vanished from the internet without a single trace. When I logged into the company server from my home computer that evening, several crucial emails were missing from our shared promotional folders. I stared at the empty digital directories, finally understanding what I had done. My hasty, emotional confrontation had acted as a loud alarm bell, warning the architect of this disaster to sweep up every last digital footprint before anyone else could find it. Colin packed his suitcases that weekend. We stood in the upstairs hallway, surrounded by brown cardboard boxes and 8 years of accumulated history. He didn't yell, and he didn't call me a liar. My husband simply zipped his canvas bag shut and stated that he could no longer live in a house where every single question mutated into a vicious struggle over who held the absolute truth. I refused to confess to an affair that never happened, but looking at his exhausted face, I finally acknowledged a different reality. I had spent years treating our marriage like an operational hazard, constantly overriding his decisions and effectively locking him out of my daily life. We separated that afternoon, and the silence he left behind was completely deafening. Months passed, pulling us steadily toward a final mediation session. On a quiet Tuesday in January, I sat at my dining table and handwrote a 5-page letter to Colin. The first 4 pages contained a brutal, honest accounting of my actual flaws. I admitted to my relentless need for control, my obsession with work, and the coldness that had slowly driven us apart. But the 5th page was different. On that final sheet of paper, I explicitly stated that I still believed the infidelity evidence was entirely fabricated, and I absolutely refused to sign my name to a fictional story someone else had authored. I kept the signed original document safely in my own possession. Colin received a full photocopy during the mediation process, and still desperate for my family to understand his side of the collapse, he carried that exact copy to my parents' house a week later. My father and mother listened to his explanation in their living room, and Colin left the thick stack of papers resting on their glass coffee table when he departed. According to security system timestamps I would uncover much later, Chelsea happened to be visiting that very afternoon, while the papers sat unattended in the quiet house. My sister quietly scanned the entire document and placed the stack right back where Colin had left it, securing the exact words she needed without ever having to steal the physical copy. Months later, while preparing for her wedding reception, Chelsea printed a fresh version containing only the first 4 pages, and carefully practiced holding the paper, ensuring her thumb would perfectly cover the small footer marking it page 4 of 5. By the time the divorce was final, Chelsea had my office, my clients, and a copy of every sentence I was ashamed to have written. 3 months after the divorce became final, I signed a commercial lease for a small space inside a renovated brick warehouse across town. The corner office lacked the sweeping city views and expensive mahogany furniture I used to enjoy at Foster House events. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light pouring through a single industrial window. My new business focused entirely on restoring historical event venues, requiring heavy lifting and long hours of solitary planning. I had traded my luxury sedan for a reliable, 10-year-old estate wagon just to fund the startup costs. Building a client roster from absolute scratch was exhausting, and yet the quiet independence tasted better than any corporate bonus ever had. The family empire continued operating without me, and I spent my days measuring original crown molding and reviewing municipal permits, trying to build something honest with my own 2 hands. One rainy Tuesday afternoon in August, a strange email bypassed my spam filter. The sender listed his name as Logan Price, a digital design freelancer. My mouse hovered over the subject line, which referenced an unpaid invoice and something called a message interface project. Clicking it open revealed 2 brief paragraphs and an attached image file. Logan asked if I knew exactly what Chelsea had used the custom message template to accomplish, noting that his final payment was 90 days past due. A heavy weight settled in my chest as I clicked the image. The attachment displayed a high-resolution screenshot of a design workspace featuring an interface that perfectly mirrored the fabricated social media profile that had destroyed my marriage. My immediate reaction was pure suspicion. This could easily be an extortion attempt, or another elaborate trap set by my former colleagues. Instead of replying to the stranger directly, I picked up my phone and called Dana Whitaker, my civil attorney, a woman with a mind like a steel trap and a deep intolerance for emotional decision-making. Dana immediately instructed me not to engage with Logan directly, and set up a secure, recorded conference call for the following morning. Sitting in Dana's pristine downtown office, listening through the speakerphone, we finally heard the designer explain his side of the project. Logan stated that Chelsea had hired him to create a realistic chat application interface, complete with custom avatars and a believable conversation history, for what she called a target marketing test campaign. He had only realized the true nature of his own product after local event industry gossip finally reached his professional network. Following Dana's strict instructions, the freelancer transferred the complete project directory through an encrypted portal. The attorney opened the master design file on her wide monitor, and we watched the cursor move across layers of digital evidence. The document contained a detailed version history confirming the exact dates the fabricated texts were constructed. Then Dana clicked into a hidden feedback panel, exposing a series of editorial notes. One specific comment stopped the breath in my throat. The instruction told the designer to make the tone sound more like Megan, accompanied by a forwarded email containing 3 actual paragraphs I had previously written to a vendor. Chelsea had actively provided my real correspondence as training material, teaching a stranger how to mimic my professional voice. To hide the expense, the final invoice submitted to the corporate accounting department had been falsely labeled as an invitation animation package. Heat radiated across my shoulders. My hand moved instinctively toward my phone, fingers ready to dial my sister's personal number. I wanted to hear the panic in her voice. I wanted to demand a confession right then and there. A cold hand clamped firmly over my wrist. Dana stared at me across the polished conference table, her expression completely unyielding. "Do you want an answer, or do you want evidence?" Dana asked, her voice dropping into a low, serious register. The question forced me to freeze. My attorney reminded me that suspicion was not proof, and calling my sister now would only give the architect of this disaster another opportunity to delete whatever data remained. I slowly pulled my hand away from the phone, finally admitting to myself that my anger was still trying to dictate my actions. Keeping the digital chain of custody completely clean was far more important than a single moment of triumph. Dana turned her attention back to the forensic report provided by her independent technical expert. The metadata analysis revealed something deeply unsettling about the file transfers. A complete download session of the final fabricated chat history had been executed from a remote device, and the machine registration name listed on the network log read Aaron Blake. Furthermore, the initial retainer deposit paid to Logan Price had originated from a corporate credit card, and the expert had already matched the last 4 digits of that account number to a card issued directly to my sister's fiancé. I stared at the numbers on the screen, a new wave of confusion washing over me. Aaron was a brand consultant, a man who had always seemed polite and completely disconnected from the toxic dynamics of my family. I had no idea whether he was an active accomplice in this character assassination or simply another victim being manipulated behind the scenes. Dana rotated the heavy laptop toward my side of the desk and tapped her pen against the illuminated screen. "The machine that built the lie belongs to the man she's marrying in 6 weeks, Dana said. Dana wasted no time after discovering that digital footprint linked to the upcoming wedding. My attorney officially transmitted a formal legal notice demanding the strict preservation of all electronic communications, project backups, and corporate servers sent to Chelsea, to Foster House events, and to every related data storage vendor. The notification avoided detailing our entire legal strategy, focusing exclusively on listing the specific categories of digital material that had to remain intact. Meanwhile, Logan signed a comprehensive sworn affidavit and willingly surrendered his primary workstation so our forensic specialist could create a secure bitstream backup of the hard drive. Working alongside our technical expert, we pulled travel itineraries, corporate calendar logs, and convention registration files for Aaron. The records proved, beyond reasonable doubt, that my future brother-in-law had been physically attending a brand strategy conference in another state on the exact days several core files were uploaded and compiled. That timeline didn't completely absolve him of all responsibility, since someone could theoretically abuse unattended hardware or shared credentials, but it significantly increased the likelihood that my sister had exploited his equipment without his explicit knowledge. Despite knowing the risks of speaking to him, I decided the groom deserved to hear the truth before walking down the aisle. A man about to bind his entire life to a chronic liar deserved a fully informed choice, and hiding the data any longer felt like actively participating in the deception myself. Before I could reach out to him, family pressure arrived at my warehouse office, wrapped in the guise of medical concern. Our father had recently suffered a mild cardiac scare, and Barbara drove across town to deliver a stern warning. Seated across my small wooden desk, my mother urged both daughters to stop causing public disturbances while Thomas recovered. I refused to offer an unconditional promise of silence. Instead, I drew a firm, unyielding boundary, explaining that I would keep the investigation quiet only if Chelsea launched no further public attacks, and if Aaron received the documentary evidence he was owed. Barbara shook her head, dismissing my conditions entirely, accusing me of searching for any possible excuse to cast a shadow over her favorite daughter's wedding day. My sister learned that the freelancer had cooperated with our legal team far faster than she had anticipated. Panicking as she realized someone still possessed the master source files, Chelsea suddenly transferred a large sum of money through a digital payment application straight to Logan's account. Along with the unexpected cash, she attached a demand that he immediately sign a retroactively dated statement, declaring the interface project was nothing more than an entirely fictional, independent piece of graphic art. Logan forwarded the notification straight to Dana within minutes of receiving it. Reading through the message string, I understood that my sister had finally realized an independent witness held the digital keys to her undoing. With the rehearsal dinner only 24 hours away, I sent a brief text to Aaron asking for 10 private minutes to speak before the evening's festivities began. I kept the message deliberately vague, avoiding any mention of the legal files over cellular networks. Unfortunately, my sister had been monitoring her fiancé's communications closely that entire week. Chelsea must have intercepted the notification, or heard Aaron mention the incoming request, because she immediately intervened, spinning a dramatic narrative for her groom, claiming I was suffering another emotional episode driven by lingering bitterness over my recent divorce. Aaron politely canceled our planned meeting through a short text, gently suggesting I could send whatever documents I wanted after the weekend celebrations concluded. That evening, a loyal former employee at the family business reached out to me through a secure messaging app, forwarding a digital copy of the updated master schedule for the wedding reception. Glancing over the revised timeline, my eyes locked onto a newly inserted segment positioned right before the first dance. Chelsea had added a formal item, titled with a sweet, familiar phrase. A cold certainty settled over my bones. My sister had successfully secured a scanned copy of my divorce letter during her visit to our parents' house months earlier, and she planned to use it as a public weapon at her own wedding. I knew walking into that ballroom would invite immediate humiliation, but staying away meant letting the lie stand as absolute, unchallenged truth. I carefully gathered the 5-page original document and the comprehensive legal summary prepared by Dana, sliding them into a structured leather folder and packing it into my purse, still holding on to the fragile hope that a private conversation with the groom might somehow prevent a full public disaster. The silence that followed the groom's denial hung thick over the grand ballroom, pressing down on 200 guests who had come expecting a fairy tale and instead found themselves trapped inside a public execution. Aaron stood motionless near the altar steps, his eyes wide and fixed on the bride. Chelsea stared back at him, her chest heaving beneath layers of white silk as the rehearsed perfection of her wedding day fractured completely apart in front of everyone. My sister struggled to find her footing, her hands trembling as she still clutched the microphone. "You told me it was just a branding experiment," Chelsea said, her voice cracking as she tried to force the blame back onto the man she had been moments away from marrying. "You helped me design the entire layout, Aaron." The groom took another slow step backward, putting physical distance between himself and the altar. He shook his head slowly, a deep frown carving lines into his forehead. "I never gave you permission to use my corporate credit card or my private device to frame anyone," Aaron replied, his voice rising just enough to cut through the anxious whispers rippling through the front rows. "I didn't wait for the argument to escalate further, or for the hotel staff to panic." Stepping out from the aisle seats, I walked past the floral arches directly toward the head table, my purse heavy against my shoulder with the tangible proof Dana had assembled. Opening the structured leather folder, I pulled out a sealed manila envelope and placed it on the white linen tablecloth right in front of the groom. "Here's the complete forensic timeline," I told Aaron, keeping my tone completely steady. "The developer's sworn affidavit, the original version history logs, and the metadata tracking every unauthorized file transfer straight to your hardware." Before the bride could lunge forward to snatch the packet away, Aaron reached out and scooped the envelope into his hands. He didn't open it right there in front of the crowd, but he gripped the thick cardboard like a lifeline. Our mother finally reacted to the chaos unfolding beneath the crystal chandeliers. Barbara hurried down the central aisle, her face flushed with humiliation, and grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Get out of here, Megan," Barbara hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "You've ruined your sister's life, just like you always wanted. Get out before I have security throw you into the street." Our father stood near the edge of the stage, looking 20 years older than his actual age. Thomas raised a trembling hand toward the bandleader, frantically signaling for the musicians to play anything at all, to drown out the disaster unfolding in front of everyone he knew. "I didn't ruin this wedding," I said, gently pulling my arm from our mother's grasp without raising my voice. "She chose to build a marriage on a foundation of forged documents and stolen identities. I merely asked her why she skipped the final page." Aaron looked up from the manila envelope, his expression hardening into absolute clarity. He turned to face the woman standing beside him in the custom silk gown. "We're done," Aaron told the bride, each word dropping like a stone into the quiet space between them. "The wedding is cancelled." Panic finally broke through my sister's polished facade completely. Chelsea dropped the microphone, letting it emit a loud, piercing squeal against the sound system as it hit the polished wood floor. She reached out to grab her fiancé's sleeve, her voice turning shrill and desperate. "You cannot do this to me," Chelsea cried out, tears finally spilling over her carefully applied mascara. "Everyone is watching. You have to believe me, she orchestrated this entire thing just to destroy my happiness." Aaron pulled his arm away from her touch with a sharp, decisive jerk. He refused to look at her tears, focusing instead on the devastating reality of what the documents in his hands represented. "No one will ever believe you didn't know," Chelsea shouted, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings as absolute desperation took over her reasoning. "Your name is on everything. The card. The laptop. The vendor records. No one will believe you knew nothing." The surrounding guests gasped audibly. Chelsea froze, finally hearing what she had just admitted out loud. Aaron's name had never protected her. It had only given her someone else to blame. The groom stared at her with a look of pure revulsion, finally realizing he had been nothing more than an insurance policy for a criminal enterprise. Without another word, Aaron turned his back on the altar and walked down the side stairs toward the exit doors, clutching the manila envelope against his chest. Chaos erupted across the banquet hall as chairs scraped backward and guests scrambled to gather their coats, eager to escape the toxic fallout of the Foster family. Chelsea stood alone under the brilliant spotlights, her magnificent gown pooling around her feet like melting snow. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her face twisted in pure hatred. "You planned this," Chelsea screamed, her voice cracking into a ragged sob. "You destroyed my wedding. You destroyed everything." "I asked one simple question," I replied, turning away from the wreckage of the stage. "You answered it with another lie." I walked steadily toward the grand exit, leaving my family behind in the empty shell of their own manufacturing. Pushing through the heavy glass doors into the cool autumn air, I found Dana leaning against the fender of her sedan, parked near the valet stand. My civil attorney watched me approach, her expression unreadable in the dim parking lot lights. "Did he take the packet?" Dana asked, opening the passenger door for me. "He took it," I answered, sliding into the front seat and feeling the accumulated tension of the past year begin to drain from my shoulders. "He knows everything now." Dana slipped behind the steering wheel and started the engine, pulling smoothly away from the luxury hotel before reporters or curious guests could gather outside. As we drove through the quiet city streets, a strange, unfamiliar warmth spread through my chest. For the first time since my marriage collapsed, I allowed myself to feel a quiet sense of vindication. But my attorney kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, offering a sobering reminder that the public humiliation at the altar was only the opening chapter. "Enjoy the quiet tonight," Dana said, shifting gears as we hit a red light. "Because tomorrow morning, she's going to realize she has nowhere left to hide. And that's when she'll start tearing down everyone around her to save herself." We drove back to my modest warehouse office in total silence, the city lights blurring past the window as I mentally prepared for the legal battles waiting on the horizon. The digital trails were secure. The physical evidence was locked away. The first line of defense had completely collapsed under the weight of its own deception. My phone buzzed against the leather seat just as we pulled into the gravel driveway behind the converted warehouse. Pulling the device from my purse, I saw an incoming text from an unknown number, routed directly to my legal counsel's forwarding line. The message came straight from Logan Price, the digital designer who had built the original fabricated interface months earlier. The words on the screen confirmed my deepest suspicions about how far my sister was willing to go to bury her own mistakes. The freelancer stated that Chelsea had just contacted him directly, less than 20 minutes after fleeing the wedding venue, offering him $50,000 in cash if he would sign a sworn statement claiming that I was the one who had originally hired him to create the fake affair profiles. I handed the phone across the console to Dana without saying a single word. My attorney read the glowing screen in the darkness of the car, a grim smile touching the corners of her mouth. The game had shifted from a civil family dispute into something much darker, and my sister had just walked right into the final trap by attempting to bribe a witness. Dana instructed Logan to maintain complete calm and avoid taking any unnecessary risks, ensuring every single instruction followed the strict boundaries of legal protocol. Working in close coordination with our technical team, the designer successfully preserved the frantic communication stream where Chelsea offered $50,000 in cash to secure a false confession. My sister begged him to delete all remaining project files, turn over his primary laptop, and leave the state entirely before formal subpoenas could reach his doorstep. Logan recorded every exchange through secure, monitored channels while declining the bribe entirely. The cover-up escalated the following morning. Chelsea routed money through a shell vendor and created a backdated invoice naming me as the person who had commissioned the fake messaging project. She then ordered Tara Mills, a junior employee at Foster House Events, to delete an old project directory under the pretense of routine maintenance. Tara knew the company had already received Dana's preservation notice. Instead of following the order, she quietly contacted the independent board chairman and saved the email in which Chelsea falsely claimed our father had verbally approved the deletion. When Thomas denied giving any such instruction, my parents finally understood that Chelsea was willing to use his name exactly as she had used Aaron's credit card and laptop, without permission, without regard for the consequences. Chelsea later destroyed her old office phone and attempted to close several cloud accounts, but the evidence no longer depended on any single device in her hand. Verified copies already existed on the corporate backup system, on Logan's preserved workstation, and inside the forensic image created by Dana's technical expert. Destroying the phone hadn't erased anything. It had simply added another documented attempt to conceal it. As the corporate investigation tightened around her, my parents made one final, desperate attempt to shield the family name from total ruin. Thomas and Barbara drove out to my warehouse office on a cold Tuesday afternoon, carrying the heavy weight of their declining health and decades of ingrained denial. My father offered a substantial financial settlement, promising to buy out my remaining shares in the family business at full market value, and demanding that I return to my old executive office. He urged me to let the family handle Chelsea through private channels, hoping a quiet internal disciplinary action would resolve the crisis before law enforcement became permanently involved. Barbara joined in the plea, warning me that a criminal conviction would completely destroy her daughter's future. "She's your sister, Megan," Barbara said, her voice cracking as she grasped the edge of my wooden desk. "You cannot let them put her in prison." I looked across the small room at the two people who had spent my entire life rewarding deception while demanding my absolute endurance. I acknowledged, quietly, that a part of me had wanted my sister to feel true fear, to experience the terrifying uncertainty of watching her carefully constructed world collapse. But looking at the fraudulent documents sitting inside my legal folder, I shook my head and quietly refused to sign any agreement that painted the conspiracy as a simple misunderstanding. The turning point arrived late that evening, when Tara Mills walked into our downtown legal suite carrying a thick manila folder of her own. The young employee delivered the digital access ticket showing the exact timestamp of the server deletion command, along with a saved copy of the deceptive email where Chelsea explicitly invoked our father's name to force compliance. Furthermore, Tara brought forward the complete, unedited backup directory she had managed to preserve according to proper corporate compliance procedures. Reading through the freshly compiled evidence, the independent chairman of the board made a definitive executive decision. He closed his leather folio, looked squarely at my father, and stated that the matter had long since moved beyond the boundaries of a private family disagreement. The leadership team formally authorized the transmission of the complete investigative dossier to the state prosecutor's office, ensuring that the digital footprints, the fabricated financial records, and the obstruction of justice charges would be evaluated by the proper legal authorities without further corporate interference. Over the next 3 months, the independent board of directors conducted a formal investigation that moved with none of the chaos of the wedding, and all of the weight Chelsea had been trying to escape. There were no screaming guests, no dropped microphones, and no dramatic accusations. There were only conference rooms, sealed evidence folders, recorded interviews, and the slow, patient accumulation of facts. Logan was interviewed first. He brought the original project files, the unpaid invoice, the version history, and the messages in which Chelsea had instructed him to make the fabricated conversations sound more like me. Tara followed with the deletion request, the email falsely claiming our father had approved it, and the backup directory she had preserved after receiving the legal notice. The accounting department produced payment records showing that company funds had been routed through a vendor account connected to the false interface project. Aaron cooperated without hesitation. He turned over his laptop, credit card statements, travel itineraries, conference registration records, and hotel access logs. The forensic review confirmed that he had been out of state when several of the core files were created and transferred. His device had been used, his corporate card had been charged, but the timeline cleared him of active involvement. Chelsea had never trusted him with the truth. She had only trusted his name to absorb the blame if the scheme ever surfaced. I attended none of the interviews. Dana advised me to stay out of the process entirely unless the board specifically requested my testimony, knowing how easily Chelsea could accuse me of directing the investigation out of pure revenge. For once, I listened. I let the evidence speak for itself, without trying to control the order in which anyone heard it. By January, the board had reached its conclusion. Chelsea's employment was terminated for misuse of company funds, falsification of records, interference with an internal investigation, and conduct that had exposed Foster House events to serious financial and legal risk. Her unvested executive bonuses were revoked. She was ordered to repay every unauthorized expense charged through the false vendor accounts. The company also issued a public correction to former clients, employees, and business partners, confirming that the allegations against me had been fabricated and that I had never engaged in any professional misconduct whatsoever. The statement didn't restore the year I had lost, but seeing my name printed beside the word exonerated affected me more deeply than I expected it to. Colin read the correction too. He sent a brief message asking if I was willing to meet. I didn't answer immediately. Vindication had given me the truth back, but it hadn't repaired the trust we had both allowed to collapse between us. Once the board completed its internal findings, Dana filed my civil claims for defamation, interference with business relationships, and lost income. She documented the clients who had suspended contracts, the salary and benefits I had lost, and the financial damage caused by being forced out of the company I had helped build. The criminal matter developed separately. The state prosecutor's office reviewed the fraudulent invoices, the witness bribery messages, the server deletion order, the misuse of Aaron's identity, and the destruction of evidence after Chelsea had received formal notice to preserve it. Each item came from a different independent source. Logan had the project files. Tara had the deletion instructions. Aaron had the device and travel records. The accounting staff had the money trail. None of it depended on my word alone, and that mattered. For most of the previous year, Chelsea had survived by making every accusation look like a petty fight between two bitter sisters. The investigation destroyed that defense completely. Too many independent records pointed in the exact same direction. By late February, her attorney understood exactly what she was facing. A public trial would expose the full history of the fake affair, the misused company money, the attempt to frame Aaron, and the effort to purchase Logan's silence. It would also leave her vulnerable to far more serious charges if a jury believed the cover-up demonstrated deliberate criminal intent. Rather than gamble on a trial she was unlikely to win, Chelsea authorized her attorney to begin negotiating an early plea agreement. When Dana told me, I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. The wedding had been the moment Chelsea's mask cracked. The months that followed proved something harder, and something more important. She had been given chance after chance to stop, to tell the truth, to accept responsibility. Each time, she chose another lie instead. The negotiated agreement required Chelsea to plead guilty to the most heavily documented felony counts, involving falsified business records, unauthorized identity misuse, corporate fund misappropriation, and post-notice evidence destruction. Even as she agreed to the terms of the plea, her legal team attempted to insert a final justification clause, blaming me for creating a hostile working environment that supposedly drove her to retaliate. Dana handed me the draft agreement in our office, pointing to the accusatory paragraph. I flatly refused to sign or authorize any document containing a false narrative that pinned any portion of the forgery back onto my own shoulders. At the same time, I refused to demand a harsher sentence out of pure vengeance, allowing the agreed legal framework to move forward without my interference. Barbara arrived at my warehouse office one chilly afternoon carrying a heavily worded letter of clemency, requesting a reduced judicial sentence. My mother placed the document on my wooden desk with trembling hands, begging me to sign it before the upcoming court date. "She will not survive a prison sentence, Megan," Barbara pleaded, tears spilling over the edges of her glasses. "You are the only person who can keep your sister out of jail." I looked across the room at the woman who had spent decades urging me to absorb every family crisis in silence. "Did you ever ask Colin to give me a chance before he filed for divorce?" I asked, my voice dropping into a steady, quiet register. "Did you ever ask the board to spare my career before you locked me out of the company?" My mother sat in complete silence, unable to offer a single word in her own defense. I didn't sign her petition. But I also refused to submit an additional statement pushing for maximum punishment. I left the final outcome entirely in the hands of the legal system, keeping my distance from the emotional appeals of a family that had never once truly protected me when the lies began. The morning air of May carried a sharp, unyielding chill through the tall windows of the state courthouse, but inside the crowded courtroom, the atmosphere felt heavy and completely devoid of oxygen. I sat on the wooden bench in the third row, my fingers resting quietly over the leather strap of my purse, while the judge reviewed the final paperwork submitted by both legal counsels. Months of relentless investigation, verified digital backups, and painful family confrontations had finally compressed into this single, quiet room. Chelsea stood beside her defense attorney near the front, wearing a plain gray suit that lacked every trace of the effortless elegance she used to project at our family events. Her posture was stiff, and her eyes remained fixed on the polished mahogany surface of the defense table, refusing to look back toward the gallery where our parents sat in stony silence. The presiding judge adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and formally addressed the court regarding the negotiated plea agreement filed earlier that spring. Following months of careful review by the state prosecutors, my sister had officially entered guilty pleas for the most thoroughly documented felony counts against her, accepting full responsibility for falsifying business records, misusing corporate funds, utilizing unauthorized digital identities to commit fraud, and deliberately destroying preserved evidence after receiving formal legal notice. The legal framework was precise and final, bypassing the chaotic spectacle of a full public trial while ensuring accountability remained absolute. The judge sentenced Chelsea to 12 months in a minimum security correctional facility, followed by 3 years of supervised probation, mandatory community service hours, and strict financial restitution orders designed to repay the funds she had diverted from the corporate accounts. There was no theatrical applause in the courtroom, and no sudden outburst of overwhelming victory. Justice arrived quietly, wearing the sober garments of procedural reality. Before the bailiff escorted her through the side doors toward the holding cells, my sister turned her head slightly and scanned the room until her gaze locked onto mine. The expression in her eyes carried a bitter, exhausted weight. "You got what you wanted," Chelsea whispered, her voice barely carrying across the wooden partition. "Everyone hates me now." I didn't stand up from my bench, and I didn't let my posture waver under the weight of that final emotional appeal. "I wanted my name back, Chelsea," I replied, keeping my tone steady and completely devoid of malice. "You kept choosing things that cost you yours." She parted her lips as if to offer one final justification, perhaps asking once more why I had refused to sign her clemency petition. But the bailiff gently placed a hand on her shoulder and guided her away down the carpeted hallway. The heavy metal door clicked shut behind them with a definitive, hollow sound that echoed through the entire courtroom. The cascading consequences of those choices reshaped the remaining landscape of our family. Within days of the sentencing, Aaron officially terminated the engagement, ensuring his legal counsel completed every remaining formality to completely sever any shared liability or lingering association with my sister's actions. He never reached out to me again, preferring to quietly rebuild his professional reputation far away from the toxic remnants of our social circle, though the formal letters of exoneration provided by our legal team ensured his career remained fully protected from any collateral damage. Colin continued his own path forward quietly, dedicating his time to his private consulting projects and maintaining a respectful distance from my newly established life. We exchanged a brief, polite email months later, acknowledging the absolute closure of our shared past, but neither of us entertained the illusion that time could reverse what had already been broken beyond repair. My father chose to step down from his active executive role at Foster House events much earlier than he had originally planned, exhausted by the cascading scandals and the heavy realization of his own lifelong favoritism. The corporate board moved quickly to appoint an external chief executive officer from outside the family, ensuring the company would be managed by professional standards rather than emotional loyalties going forward. Barbara and I maintained a polite, highly restricted form of communication. My mother called occasionally on Sunday afternoons, speaking in cautious tones about the weather or her gardening club, but she never again attempted to sweep family misconduct under the rug, or demand that I sacrifice my boundaries to keep the peace. I answered her calls with calm civility, yet I firmly established that I would no longer step back into the role of the household caretaker who cleaned up after everyone else's disasters. A few weeks after the sentencing proceedings concluded, Thomas sent a formal letter through his corporate attorney, offering to reinstate me as the primary operations director of Foster House events, complete with a substantial equity package and total administrative control. The invitation represented everything I had once believed was my ultimate birthright within the family enterprise. Sitting at my desk in the quiet brick warehouse across town, I read the formal proposal twice before setting it down beside my laptop. I politely declined the offer through an official response drafted by Dana. Returning to the corporate empire would have meant walking back into a system that had once required me to prove my innocence while actively shielding the person manufacturing the lies against me. I preferred the dusty floorboards, the industrial windows, and the heavy physical labor of restoring historical properties that possessed actual structural integrity. My independent studio secured its first major commercial restoration contract that spring, earned entirely through competitive bidding and meticulous craftsmanship rather than inherited privilege or hidden financial backing. The work was demanding, messy, and deeply satisfying, allowing me to build something lasting with my own hands and my own verified reputation. By July, exactly 1 year after the initial nightmare began, I unlocked the heavy metal storage cabinet in the corner of my office to sign the final financial settlement papers closing out the civil litigation. Resting at the very bottom of the top drawer lay the original 5-page document I had written during the final mediation with Colin, many months earlier. Pulling the heavy papers out into the afternoon light, I flipped through the sheets slowly. The first 4 pages still contained every brutal, unfiltered confession of my own marital flaws, detailing my relentless obsession with control, my emotional distance, and the high walls I had unconsciously erected around our home. Those admissions were entirely real, and looking at them no longer caused me shame, but rather a profound sense of self-awareness. Then my eyes dropped to the final sheet of paper. The 5th page still held the forensic summary, the verified metadata logs, and the cold digital proof of the conspiracy my sister had constructed to erase my identity. I didn't take a match to the papers, and I didn't tear them into confetti to celebrate some hollow triumph. The document was no longer a weapon of retaliation, nor was it a shield against unmerited accusations. It had simply become a piece of history, a recorded archive of a chapter that had taught me the exact cost of misplaced loyalty and the irreplaceable value of absolute truth. Carefully squaring the edges of the pages, I slid the document back into its protective manila folder and locked the cabinet door with a firm, satisfying click. I picked up my leather portfolio, checked my watch, and walked out the front door to meet a new architectural consultant waiting for me downstairs, stepping directly into the bright afternoon sunlight without looking back once. When you spend your entire life building a fortress for others, you often forget to check whether the foundation under your own feet is secure. True strength is never found in how much chaos you can silently absorb, or in how many disasters you can quietly clean up behind people who refuse to hold themselves accountable. Protecting your peace requires absolute clarity, firm boundaries, and the courage to refuse ownership of mistakes you never made. No family title and no shared history should ever cost you your truth, or demand that you sacrifice your identity to preserve a comfortable illusion. Have you ever stayed silent to keep the peace, only to realize the silence was destroying you from the inside out?